help in life. For through the knowledge mediated, the reader is again brought closer to life and led back to God. The Grail Message deals with important fundamental questions of life by explaining in a clear and logical way the automatic working of the laws of nature, the whole weaving of creation, allowing every process to be recognized, and thereby the purpose of our whole life. It is directed at the individual and speaks to the innate experiences of the human being, their strengths and weaknesses. Thus every reader has the opportunity to discover, through the intuitive perception, if what is stated is the truth. Combining with matter-of-fact reasoning, a complete world picture arises, where there is no separation between the visible world and the great world beyond the five senses, nor any separation between scientific and religious striving for knowledge. I'd like to give you a couple of quotes from the author of the Grail Message, Riyna. The hearer and reader of my lectures should always work within himself, keenly probing and building bridges from one lecture to the other, as well as out into the great and small world happenings. Only then will he be able to understand the Grail Message and find that it gradually shapes itself into one complete whole, without leaving any gaps. Again and again in all the happenings, the reader will come back to the basic features. He can explain everything without having to change even one single sentence. The word of the Grail Message lives, so that it permits only those people who really carry the honest desire in their souls to find abundantly. All else is automatically rejected by it. For the arrogant and those who seek superficially, the message will remain the book with 7 seals. And I would like to finish with one more quote from the author. I wish to fill the gaps which have so far always remained unanswered in the souls of men, and which never leave any serious thinker in peace if he earnestly seeks for the truth. So dear listeners, just to remind you again, the topic for tonight is finding what works. And it might sound a bit strange, but I'm sure everybody wants to have success in their life and be effective in whatever they do. So obviously that means we need to find whatever we're dealing with, to find a way that it works. So Brother Riyna, I mean, you know, this is like such a fundamental thing, because it's such a big area, you know, living our lives successfully, let's say. It's like, you know, the basic needs I have, obviously eating, having a home, and a job and so on, income and things like that, and obviously relationships, being successful in relationships, family, friends, work, and also as human beings we have our spiritual aspect, a spiritual side as well, where we commune and so on. And so, you know, you feel like you need a work-life balance, we can say, where everything works. We have good food, we have good rest, and you know, a job which doesn't stress us out, and then at the same time we need time to reflect on life, spiritual things in life, and so on. So let's start with okay, I'm going to talk about work actually, Brother Riyna, because you know,
wait a second.
do you want to say something? Yeah, go
Yes,
on. Do you want to maybe start something? Yeah.
I will ask Brother Sard a question for a change.
Okay, go ahead. Yes.
So, how encompassing is that concept of working? Or do we want to do something, or do we want to buy something which does not work? How?
Okay.
If you buy if you buy a new computer or your new iPhone, do you want it to work, or?
Of course we want it to work. Otherwise, it won't it will not be effective what we are doing with it.
Exactly, it won't be effective. That's the big thing. It is, in fact, a useless thing. It's just a piece of trash if it does not work.
That's right.
So, would you say whatever you buy, you always demand that it works, or at least expect that it works?
Absolutely. Because, I mean, if I think about it, things are in the world. Let's say, there has been a development, or I don't want to use the word evolution, but there's continuous improvement going on. So, and we know that with the phones, if you let's say talk about iPhone or something, the one we have today and the one we started with, it has many more features now. So, but you're right. The point is that it needs to work, because you can, let's say before it was just making phone calls, right? And but then there was also the issue of radiation. If you remember, there's a real worry that they could damage our, if you put your phone next to your ear, can, basically could fry your brain over time doing that. And I think those things have not, the risk has not completely been taken away, but they have, I think they have improved on that now. So things are a little bit safer and things like that. So yeah, is there anything more you would like to say? Ask me about that? Yeah.
There's obviously, you mentioned an important point. There are things when we develop something which are very difficult to foresee or to know in advance. Like a mobile phone is a very nice thing, and it's very useful. It makes life very easy, and we can keep in touch with almost everyone all the time, and have the news. On the other hand, we have a gadget which receives radiation and sends electromagnetic radiation, and the side effect of course was partly foreseen. We do not quite know when these phones were developed how damaging those electromagnetic waves might be. They're always an area where we do not know.
Yes.
Now it depends, what do you call working now? If you buy the iPhone, do you want to be certain that also that you are not being harmed by the radiation?
Well, I think the main point you mentioned there is that some things you discover as you go, like for example the radiation risk, which it was, I mean, because when it was invented, it was obviously that the aim was only for the communication, and maybe they did not test to the nth degree the other risks that came with it. So I would say maybe that's part of life in development. We just, it's like you're going to discover things, as you've said, and when that happens, you deal with it when you discover it, and you can't just foresee certain things. Maybe that's or at least, let's say maybe we are not using all our abilities, because I could say when they do the testing of these things, it's all done on a physical level, and not on, let's say, beyond that level. And maybe we know that we in our programs that we have said that we are actually, human beings are spiritual beings, and maybe that's what is lacking when we invent these inventions. We need to assess them spiritually as well as the physically, that we test them in the scientific way. And maybe that's a different level. We know that spiritual is not physical. It's a totally different level of activity than the physical. And so maybe that is that I could say that's what's lacking right now in fact for centuries and maybe thousands of years of human beings of developing, not actually applying all their ability when they invent something, that they consider all these other things as well.
I think we have to be a little bit careful here to keep different levels apart. When we say this this new mobile phone you're buying, also emits electromagnetic radiation, and that might affect your biological body, which is also physical gross material. Then of course we talk about something which is physical, which we can investigate scientifically, and we can test and test and test. Of course, sometimes the testing takes a very long time, and one needs decades, perhaps even more, until the results come back if something is damaging. Of course, before you put anything onto the market, things have undergone extensive testings.
Yes.
But I think we can sum up to now, our requirement from the environment and from other human beings is generally that they give us things or sell us things which work, so that that demand, it must work, is almost universal. And
Yes.
on the other hand, when we give something, we should also endeavor to give something which is working. Someone who gives something and knows it's not working or only partly working and hides that thing, he's definitely a crook, isn't he?
Yes.
Or what you would call such a
I
person.
mean,
If someone sold you a phone,
yes.
he says, oh, it's a second-hand one, it's been used, and you realize at home it's working wonderfully, you did not test it, or you couldn't test all the functions, you go home and suddenly you realize it doesn't do certain things.
Well, that brings in the another aspect, which is money, and obviously people are investing money. The mobile companies are investing money in their phone, and you could see the company that does the best research, that seems to become the successful one, and then as you can see, iPhone is like basically number one, and then Samsung is like number two.
Oh, that's I didn't mean that.
Okay.
Sard,
Okay.
Let me see. You just bought something,
Yes.
a second-hand car from a friend, or
Right.
if you call him a friend, and you realize when you bought it, I mean, there were so many things glitched up. I mean, it had an accident, and it was
Okay.
just masqueraded away. I mean, they just polished the thing and put paint over it, and they are underlying it's a very rusty old thing,
Yes.
not worth a lot, and needing a lot of repairs. But when you bought it, it was it was said, oh, it's in perfect order, it's got a new MOT, and you will have no troubles driving another 150,000 miles with it.
Yeah.
If
I
it
got your
breaks
point.
down after a few kilometers and then comes one repair after the other, you would think, oh, I have been taken in.
Yes.
Someone's been cheating me.
Yes. So I've got your point now. So yes, honesty is in whatever, let's say, product that is being sold has to be there, because that immediately when the person discovers that he's been deceived, they lose his trust. I mean, apart from that, the product not being usable. So, and then obviously the more, and so that person who is misleading or deceiving, very soon he'll be found out, and then people won't even go to him any more for anything else. So you can see when we talk about finding something that works, truth, honesty must be there. So it's like facing facts, because if you don't see the situation as it actually is, and rather than you imagine it to be, or somebody deceived you that, oh, this is a workable thing, and then you actually tried and it doesn't work, of course there's a loss of trust, and then maybe he never made a good product anyway. It's like not only there's a knock-on effect from that. So so that is a very important part of, we can say, if something works, it has to be based on, let's say, truthfulness.
Okay, so we shifted now our thing away from the object which we bought, and we are saying when we get something,
Yes.
We want that it works, or if it has any faults, that the seller clearly says where it does not work and then reduces the price accordingly, so that you say, okay, I have to do some work, but then afterwards I've got a nice mobile phone, but I have to replace this and I have to do this and that to it. So one must be awake when one does a deal. The other thing is, of course, that if something is to work perfectly, we are talking now about the process of buying something, or from the other point of view, there's a selling side and a buying side. So how can we make, or what are the prerequisites for buying procedure or selling procedure which works? And there we said we need integrity from both sides. So the seller must be truthful about the object he's selling and pointing out clearly what it does and where its shortcomings are. So and the buyer must, when he pays, not try to cheat the one whom he's selling by giving something in return which is less valuable. If it's an exchange based on goods, if it's an exchange based on money, he should then say, okay, this is how much it is worth, as you told me, and then the give and take is in balance, and then one could say that exchange of goods that has been working well. Both sides will go away and they will be satisfied. The seller will say, oh, I've got that, what the thing is worth, and the buyer will says, okay, and I received the object which I wanted, and I knew exactly what I would get. Have not been deceived, and he doesn't feel any grudge. He doesn't feel he has overpaid, nor has he tried to underpay it, which is also kind of cheating. So the cheating can go on both sides. So, and if we have a society where we try to keep all the exchanges, the gross material exchanges, that they proceed in an honest way, the society will be much better. Because we can trust the other one. We do not think, oh, is he just to get my money in my pocket, or you don't have to check, because the other person, as a rule, says the truth, and things become much nicer that way. And that will bring up a whole change in society if we try to get those interactions between other people onto an honest footing, and that the exchanges we do, that they are always in balance and that they're always based on truth. And there comes integrity of the business partners is of the greatest importance that we do it.
So these are the principles, Brother Riyna, you're saying that there has to be truthfulness and there has to be a balance. These are like eternal principles of life, where, sometimes we use these words as if it's just ordinary thing and not really take it for granted that how deep that is. That, this honesty. Sometimes you think you can cut a corner, let's say, just because you want to do the deal or whatever it is. But cutting those corners, you're actually bending the truth, you could say, or bending the law of balance. And then, of course, it hits you later, and so it's not that it actually doesn't work. It just on the surface, it might appear to be, oh yes, I managed to sell this thing I want to sell, but it's only a self-deception to believe, by hiding something or, not declaring something, that you're actually, you're bypassing the system, you could say. So yeah, so basically we've established that now. I think that really there has to be honesty, there has to be truthfulness, and there has to be a balance.
And of course, you're quite right. One must realize that such a principle as the deal must be in balance. There must be a balance between give and take. That, of course, is religion. That is, in order to work a give and take relationship between human beings, and the economy is based on give and take relationships, we must adhere, we must obey that law of balance. If we do not, one party is being cheated. And of course there comes, it has consequences. If some party is cheating too many, to almost routinely, to almost everybody, the trust of the persons around into that party will decrease, and people will say, well, keep your hands off him, he's not a solid, good businessman. You cannot trust his words, he's lying through his teeth, he's selling you a piece of garbage for trying to sell you a piece which is not work. The effects are negative for himself after some time, but he has cheated some other people, and perhaps he finds always some new one whom he can cheat again. And but this is not a good state, so truthfulness is again a principle which is ingrained in creation. That's what we would like to get at. It's ingrained in order to make a commercial interchange work satisfactorily for all the sides and all participants. We must try to keep those give and takes or exchanges of goods balanced, so that the give is balanced, so that the give is balanced by the take, the value of the take thing. And we must be truthful about it. And there's really no place for the crook who tries to undermine that thing. He can undermine it, but in societies where it's routinely undermined, you do not feel well, and you have to defend yourself.
Yes.
I hope we've got some listener. Or?
Yes. No, this is somebody sending me a message, I think. Sorry for that. I just wanted to ask you, to expand on what you said, Brother Riyna, there. At the moment, we've been talking about, let's say, an interaction between, let's say, two people, or maybe within a society. But what about internationally? In fact, between countries when they trade, people are in the politics or in the news. You hear, oh, it is in our self-interest. This is a country talking. The leader of a country saying, we are doing this in our self-interest, and behind it you can sort of almost hear, well, it's at the expense of, they don't want to consider the other country's interest, the one they're trading with. They just want to only look at their own interests, and so you can see, without naming any countries or putting, in a specific example of anything, you can see in the world, let's say, some countries are like dominant in, let's say, economically, and others are less, and they're sort of dependent even on in this way. And so my point basically is this principle that we have discovered of honesty or truthfulness and balance. It applies not only obviously on the one-to-one level that we have direct practical experience on a daily basis, but obviously in the world as well, between countries and so on. And
of course the treaties between countries are also worked out by individuals, and so even if many people work on creating an international treaty, everyone has to be truthful. Now, let us look at one principle. Since we are talking about exchange of goods, exchange of wares, what principles there are. There's, let us say we've got two business partners, and we can simply apply the same rules between two business partners which are individual to business relations between companies or business relations between countries. And and a principle which is very much adopted today is the principle of profit maximization. So if I go into a business deal with you and I want to sell you an iPhone or just a mobile phone, if that principle is working, if we work according to the principle of profit maximization, what does that mean?
Okay, so for me, profit maximization would mean that I make my product as cheaply as possible and then sell it to you the most price I could sell it to you, you know, and then maximize the profit. And I know what we notice it every year, the companies want to make more profit, so they want to make more sales, become more dominant in their, you know, let's say try to make the product the best product, so that it, and let's say grow it into, first they start maybe in the West, and then they start selling it in the rest of the world. So that's what I see. That's the goal of the profit maximization, to increase it. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what about balancing? Because it feels, if you do that, you're suppressing something, or something must be being squeezed, you know, because it doesn't seem real that you can continuously grow and grow and grow. There's a limited number of resources, you know, the limited number of people. So we have 7 billion people on the earth, you know, so the most you could sell is, in quotes, 7 billion phones. You know, that's ever what you would get. So, and you feel, if it's every year, the demand is to increase the profit every year, more and more, it feels unsustainable that can really be happening.
Let's take it a little bit more to a simpler level.
Right.
If I want to maximize my profits, and the buyer, of course, the equivalent of profit maximization on his side is to pay as little as possible. So, and if I take that as a principle, there is no barrier where this whole thing becomes out of balance, or where it becomes immoral. I will try to make my product cheaper and cheaper, and will, in order to maximize my profits, I will praise it in a way which is not in line anymore with the quality of the product. And in this sense, I invite almost the lie, to lie about my product. And we find this in advertisements, which obviously are not truthful anymore. And I can give some examples out of recent history, but I won't do it at the moment. But I'm losing the line. I'm violating that law that invites to violate that law. And even there comes up a new morality, that you think the one who sold something to someone for the highest price, for an incredible high price, and really cheated the other person, and you think that's a clever person. Of course that's a clever person, but that cleverness is not what brings us forward. That is just an intellectual cleverness. And with that principle, profit maximization, the whole exchange mechanism of a society will be twisted and contorted. The people want to buy always the cheapest things, and then they do not care anymore how the animals have been treated, and they are not not thinking anymore, does the farmer really get his money worth for the work he needed to do inside? And we have this profit maximization principle, or I want, the result is on the buying side, it's the greed. I don't want to pay anything, I do not care how the animals live, I do not care if the farmer gets what he's worth. And unfortunately, this principle has been adopted as almost an honest way to do business. And in fact, it was something which Karl Marx said how the capitalist society works. It works on profit maximization, and even big companies repeat that thing. This is not how a good market economy works. It will produce sufferings on all sides, and all the things we have really result out of this simple principle we have, which is violated all the time. The give and take must be in balance. There must, and so also if the employer tries to reduce the cost of profit to maximize his profits, he of course tries to reduce the costs as much as he can, and he presses the wages wherever he can, and he moves the production to somewhere else, to a low-wage country, which of course has a terrible impact. Lots of bad impacts which are so innumerous that we cannot talk about them, but one of the impacts would be that in the mother country where he had his factory before, let us say England, of course people become jobless, because if they are moved to, let us say, China, and in China a person just gets 250 pounds a month, and he's working 30 days without Sunday, Saturday and Sunday, of course that's incredibly cheap. And the employer takes that into consideration, and he harms other people. It starts being harmful to other people, to his own society where he is, to the people in China who have to work for very little. Of course it's true, the money is worth a lot more there, but still we know how the production sites in China look, where they make the jeans or something. The rivers, the pollution, the poisoning of the environment is so incredibly complete and devastating that the farmers just despair, because it's a poison liquid running through the rivers, and the workers are exploited with 30 days, and they have to breathe in those stupid things that some stupid teenager can walk around in ripped jeans, having that stress look. So we are creating, by violating this very simple principle of give and take, we make whole economies not work properly, and we spread suffering on all sides, be it to animals, being to the people who work for some for some company. They have a right to receive to receive the proper value for what they did, and they should demand it. They should not demand more, because that would be profit maximization again, but they should stop there and say, okay, I've worked that much, and they should get a realistic picture of what they contributed. Of course they will, that wrong thinking, not taking the balance into consideration, almost every human being is infested with that, and we have to learn to get out of this. But profit maximization is not a principle on which we should run companies, or on which we should on which the market should be based. And we can have many other examples where we see the bad results of this. But underneath there is one principle and that's important. Things have to be in balance. That principle has not been created by man. He simply has to adhere to it in order to create a more just society, or a more just interaction between him and other people. I'm thinking now of the economic interactions between you and between people. There, the principle, things must be in balance. That's a principle for a functioning market. Profit maximization and greed is not a principle, and unfortunately it has taken hold in the brains of modern man, but nonetheless it is wrong. So
Thank you for that, Brother Riyna. You really sort of built that picture, you know, how big the effect is of not having that law of balance working. So, dear listeners, I want to remind you, you're listening to Blessed Radio. It's the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail Message by Abdushin. And the topic for tonight is finding what works. So it's really quite an interesting topic to think about. And you can join us with any questions or comments. If you're in the UK, it is 079 444 31366. You can call, text or use WhatsApp. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 31366. And we are broadcasting obviously on blessradio.org, the website. You can also go to youtube.com and search for Bless Radio 1 and then type live stream, that you can hear us live. And after the show at 8 p.m. we finish, 10 minutes after, you can hear the recording. Just look for again, Bless Radio 1 on youtube.com, and then type Bro Sard, B-R-O, Sard, S-A-A-D, and the topic for tonight is, you can say Grail Message as well, and after that you can look for the topic for tonight, which is finding what works. And of course you can listen to our previous shows as well if you would like that. So yes,
and we are waiting for your calls.
Yes, we love to get, the interaction is so good to have from you, because that way we can focus on what actually you want to hear.
And
or
also,
ask about.
When you're talking, we don't have to talk, which is a very nice relief, because we are just in two
today
and talking all the time.
Yes.
Makes our throats dry.
Yes.
Brother Sard, you had some
I do have something
drink
for you. It's just under there, on there.
Oh, good.
Yes. So I'm going to give Brother Riyna a little bit of a break there.
Yeah.
So let's talk now. The thing what we have been talking so far is the, let's say, the material world, that, you know, the physical life that we have on this earth, having a balance there, you know, having truth there. But obviously this is universal. But go on.
Okay, the important thing is what we worked out. The principles to make those interactions work are not made by human beings. We cannot say we want to do an exchange of goods between two people or two companies or between states any way we want. We are bound by that principle. It must be in balance, and we are bound by that principle that we like to be honest on both sides, because honesty makes life very easy, and an exchange can pass on very quickly because I can trust the other person, because he's saying the truth. I know that, so I don't have to make research and try to find the other shop where it's cheaper. Perhaps it's a little bit cheaper, but I don't mind, because I know I can trust the shop, and also his after sales service and everything is good.
Yes.
So trust is a wonderful thing to have in a society. Think of that. If we have a society where honesty is the thing, and people would not steal anymore, we wouldn't need any keys. We wouldn't need to million times unlock the front door and perhaps a second time to lock the front door. All these things which make life so disagreeable. We wouldn't need to remember all the passwords for every little thing. We could leave everything like it is. Because in an honest society it would be wonderful. I wouldn't have to lock my house, I wouldn't have to lock my car, I wouldn't need a password, I wouldn't forget passwords, I could go to the cash machine. Life would be so much nicer and so much more agreeable if honesty would could take hold again in our minds and in our heart, because these are really things of the heart. Being in balance is a thing of the heart. You know if you've been fair or not. That is an emotion, fairness. You feel it in your heart, and we have to try to become fair again. And so
Brother Riyna, you're saying we should combine the sort of logic of the balance of give and take on the physical level with our emotions as well, because so in a way this is all linked together again. You're saying it's like your happiness, your happiness, yes, and calmness or the peace in your soul, it depends also on the earthly activities, because obviously we're living on this earth. So those laws, basically what you're just reminding us it is fundamental principles, universal principles, not only on the physical level that we see on a daily basis, but actually those principles affect us on a spiritual level as well.
Of course they affect us on a spiritual level. I mean, if things work and we can trust is a spiritual thing. If I cannot trust, I feel uneasy. Also, if you are honest in your business relations, and you probably can sleep much better if you had slaves working for yourself and you worked them that they would die after a few years because you don't feed them properly and you make them work 16 hours a day. I do not know how you can sleep well at night and not have remorse. I mean, how did you earn your wealth then? By extortion and slavery? That if you are in any way still a human being which is alive to his soul and what his heart says and doesn't shut it off artificially, he probably, I would think that you would have sleepless nights. And women are more sensitive. They know very quickly when the husband goes too far in something, because they have this sensitivity. There comes the question, how can you sleep well after having done such things? And so the morality or the laws, the fabric underlying the universe is a moral fabric. We have not made it. We have to conform with it in order that things work. And balance, we have just talked now almost exclusively of balance, but let us think of another thing. I think should I mention that? Okay, I mention it. Let's say AIDS. We know how it's spreading rapidly, and I'm treading a little bit highly sensitive ground, and I try to take my examples from more neutral areas. But okay, there are a few facts about AIDS. The AIDS virus is transmitted via body fluids only. So normally if you have a normal sexual intercourse, I hope I can say the transmission of the AIDS virus is probably less likely than when you have a sexual intercourse where wounds occur like like for example with homosexuals, if they have anal intercourse, I have to mention it, then of course the virus has a good chance, a wonderful chance to spread. So already it is better then, if you want to not contract AIDS, it's better not to go to do that kind of sexual intercourse. And that's a morality built into the world. We have to simply accept it. It's the virus does not know any morals, but if we want to keep the spreading of that virus, we have to adhere to certain norms. On the other hand, it spreads, of course, in areas where there's lots of promiscuity, and that has a much more chance to spread, like many other diseases of that sort, like syphilis, and we know where prostitution is. There's all kinds of how do you call those diseases? Venereal
disease.
Venereal diseases.
Yes, yes.
And that's why governments say we have to control, medically control areas of promiscuity like prostitution very hard to keep those terrible illnesses in check. But quite simply you could say, if we came to a society again, or learned truthfulness in our relationship, and you're truthful to your wife, and I mean truthful in a more deeper sense, but including also the sense that you are true to her and you do not engage in promiscuous behavior, then if everyone did that and you and your wife do not have AIDS, it will not spread, it would not exist, it would have no chance of spreading. So in a way one can say that promiscuity is against the structure of the universe, and we fail. It does not work to glorify promiscuity, which is done nowadays, it's the big thing, or to glorify, well, before they called sexual behaviors which used organs which were not used to do sexual intercourse with, like the anus or like the mouth. They called that behavior, was 30 years ago it was called perverse. It means against nature. And today, of course, it's glorified, that kind of behavior. But if we would go back and say, okay, if you behave in a non-promiscuous way and you do not exchange your partners freely, and you do not engage in perverse sexual practices, I'm using that word now, then we could stop all venereal
diseases. Yeah.
All venereal diseases. So there is a kind of way to make things work. We have to adhere to certain things, to certain principles, and these principles, we can say it's the morality which is built into the universe, which is built into the structure of the universe, which underlies it, and this we have to accept. Now, what happens if I do not accept it? Of course we can do it, we have a free will, we can say, oh, promiscuity is something in it, and I love to swing around with any kind of gender, and I like to have sexual intercourse with anything I like, with an animal or whatever. And then of course those venereal diseases, they start spreading, and a whole industry, you have to try to keep it in check. You have an uphill struggle, you have to pour millions and millions of pounds into research to try to keep that virus in check, or once you've contracted AIDS, I mean, you're constantly under a cocktail of medication to keep that virus from from killing you. You can do that, but it costs millions, and of course in a way it keeps an industry alive, but it's for the people who have contracted the disease. It's not a very nice state to be in. In fact, it's an awful state to be in the most terrible state. And there's a very easy way to combat it, which is to adhere to those laws. And there's a very unnatural way to combat it. Say, oh, we declare those things as natural. They still try to do that. The people who glorify such behavior. But then on the other hand, you have to pour resources into research and trying to develop those medicines. And there comes a point when we, through such behavior, through behavior which is against the fabric of the universe, that we have to pour so much money in to keep it in check, and probably at one point we cannot keep it in check anymore, and we just have to succumb to it, then that it's better to do it the simple way, which is in line, I would call it now, I said, the structure of the universe. I can say also with the laws of creation. And so I stop here and I have a little drink.
Okay.
And I'll wait for some users or some listeners coming up.
Hopefully, yeah, dear listeners, please do join us with any responses that you might have. I mean, yes, Brother Ryan has clearly pointed out that there is a structure, and which is not made by us. Those laws, natural laws, we can also call them laws of creation. We've said already, so they're also called natural laws. And so there's like a system which you can't. Well, you can go against the system, but then there are negative consequences from it. And if you go with the system, then you get happiness because you're in balance. So, and now, yeah, go on, Brother Riyna.
I'll give you another example, which is perhaps not so controversial as AIDS. And I read it recently in the newspapers. It was in the German newspapers, and it covered in vitro fertilization. That means couples who cannot have children or have difficulty in getting children. You can take an egg from the ovaries and have a sperm from the man and have the fertilization process practically in vitro, which means in glass, outside of the body. And that is hailed as a most wonderful means of to have a child at a very advanced age, and or to have a child when there's a problem of infertility. This is a problem which is perhaps most spread among the white race, and and it's also part of our lifestyle today. The women choose a career and decide having children very late, and so they go to fertilization clinics and try in vitro fertilization. The thing what has been shown is that there was a lot of studies already showed that there are really negative consequences of this, and they looked at the children, and the clinics and the medical industry, especially the scientists and the doctors, the physicians working in that field, suppressed almost systematically research which was alarming and showed there is something wrong. We know that the sheep already died, or all animals which have been fertilized in that artificial way, and we know it's a very critical thing. And now they've found that heart diseases and the aging of blood vessels proceeds in a very rapid way amongst people which have been whose embryos who were created by in vitro fertilization, and they age more quickly and the blood vessels decay and there are lots of heart diseases. And they also found out that many of the research where it showed it had no side effect, and the establishment doing those things tried to say, oh well, this has nothing to do with the in vitro fertilization, it's a consequence of the thing that the people are older or are for some other reasons not able to conceive in a natural way. It's their age which created that misfunctioning. And the article showed many of physical things which I do not remember of a medical nature, which go wrong. I mean, really bodily, misshapen bodily parts and things like this. So I'm not going to it. But this simply says, without that we know that taking out that process of fertilization out of the human body is a very dangerous process, and we know already we can do it, only it has to be done very quickly, and the egg has to be inserted very quickly in the womb, that it works at all. But even then the consequences are not good consequences. There's lots of misshapen bodily parts can happen, lots of illnesses they contract, and there's the aging of the heart and the blood vessels, which proceeds in a much quicker way than in normal human beings. And there were many other things also, and it's only recently that after decades of practicing that researchers suddenly got through that wall of the people interested in that it proceeds, because they were earning their money with it, that this research is being published. And it created a shock. It was published in one of the foremost most respected German newspapers, and so that's another thing where we go into something unnatural, and working against nature in the long run never pays. And what is natural, that is not determined by the human being, that is where we simply have to adapt. And this adaptation, that's really the true meaning, what the Grail Message want, and also what that word Islam means. It means adapt, bow to that law, and if you violate it, you get bad consequences. That's what the word Islam is. Surrender to those laws, surrender to what is natural, surrender to the will of God in the last analysis.
Brother Riyna, can I come in there?
Yeah.
I just want to say, does that mean, let's say some couple can't get pregnant, obviously it's the woman, can't get pregnant, they just have to accept the circumstances and sort of give up, and just because we say, what we're basically saying here is that you mustn't do things unnatural. If you do things unnatural, there are some, let's say, very terrible consequences of that. It may be long-term consequences, but there are absolutely some negative consequences from doing things which are unnatural. So that's the question then. Do you accept, because you said that's the laws of God, or that's the will of God, that maybe I'm not destined to have children. Do you just accept it, I
think that the problem here is we cannot isolate something. We live in such a complex, we are so interconnected with other human beings and with everything else in the universe. we also now we become a little bit more aware that we are completely interconnected with nature, what nature does, and completely dependent on it. And the human societies and this interconnection and the reciprocal actions flowing between all that are very difficult to to ascertain. And if I say, okay, now there's a couple and she's, let us say, 45 years old and she had a career as a judge, and she decides now she wants a child, and and the husband is perhaps 60 years old, and he had already he was already married, and his wife became too old and he took a younger wife, and he's 60, he's 45, a little bit an unnatural thing for a couple, because it already looks a little bit funny. She's 20 years younger, she's 45. Normally you have children in your 20s or 30s, and so we simply cannot say now, oh, well, you have to live with it. You can try it the natural way. In fact, as an aside here, they found out that if the medical industry picked people for in vitro fertilization, and they would have also got children just the normal way, because they picked more the healthy things, to make the in vitro fertilization work. So they did not take the desperate cases necessarily, but they took cases with a very fair chance, and they made a kind of a counter study, and they showed those people often, if they would have selected but for some reason did not go for the in vitro fertilization after all, although they were still selected for the progress, many people, I do not know whether the percentage was incredibly high, they would have got pregnant anyway, just in the next year or so. And they followed up such cases where they were first accepted for in vitro fertilization, and then they did not do it. So already the industry was cheating there. They were picking more the couples which are healthy, because they wanted not any, they knew there are side effects, and they knew they are more likely in the couples where it's even more unlikely that they will get a child. But okay, we have now created a type of society where this pattern of behavior is quite established. And also, if we to push the women into the male sphere of activity. I do not say that there is not a female sphere of activity, in my opinion. It's now my opinion. There's millions of things to do for women and men, but the male sphere of working is different, or slightly different. It overlaps, obviously, in parts, from the female sphere of working. And by disregarding the female sphere of working, of course, we have created conditions where women cannot have to pursue a very male-oriented career, and which already, this type of activity itself makes already having children much more difficult, but it also pushes, because of the career, pushes the age when finally the partners want to have a child to a much more advanced age. And so the pressures are on the human beings now to conform with that new ideal, which is saying, oh, man equals woman, and it's the equal sign which is the bad thing, which is the unnatural thing, because then we know by millions of studies, you can take any psychology book, that a woman is different from a man, and that she's more sensitive, more emotional, aware than the man, much more sensitive on the emotional level, that she talks differently than a man. And we force her into the male professions. Bus driving, best put her down into a ditch with one, what do you call those, pneumatic hammers?
Pneumatic drill.
A pneumatic drill. Well, this is not a liberation of the woman. That is treating her not according to her nature. And this treating her not according to the nature has been propagated by that philosophy, which is now adopted everywhere, which says man equals woman. And there's no equal sign between that. Otherwise there would have been no necessity for woman if there's an equal sign. But that woman exists. And there I just say, in this creation nothing exists without a reason, and nothing is can be substituted. I would simply say from that point of view, woman is absolutely necessary, and we need femininity, we need female activity. And so that couple, to come back to the point, there are lots of pressures which forced us into such situations where now, as a reciprocal action, as a consequence, we have the problem that infertility spreads, mainly among the white race, I would say, and of course on other races too. I saw that. Okay, I don't give that example. It was from Brazil, but that does not matter. I think we have said now quite many things, and yes. I'm wondering that the telephones are not ringing.
I think some people just enjoy listening and maybe don't want to come, but we do welcome it. Please, listeners, do join us. It really will make it interesting for us as well, for you to take part in the discussion. Just to remind you, is the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth. The Grail Message by Abdrushin. And the topic for discussion tonight is finding what works. And we've been talking a lot about balance and truth, being a universal principle. And we'd love you to join us. The question is, you can contact us on this number, 079 444 31366. You can call, text or use WhatsApp. That's for UK, of course. 079 444 31366. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 31366. Brother Riyna, what I want to go into now, we've given lots and lots of examples, of the earthly and practical things of how to, really realizing, if something's working or not working, and why it might not be working, because it's not aligning with the laws, natural laws. Now, and or nature, just aligning with nature. So, Brother Riyna, how do we sort of discover? It's like this. Everything's a discovery, isn't it? So now we have out there religions and teachings and so on. But how you have been talking about it, Brother Riyna, it's like we discover these things on our own. We can discover it on our own. These things, these principles. So, would you say? Are we capable of discovering everything just by just sensing things, or do we need some knowledge that which sets a framework, because we, like you said, we did not create nature, we did not create these laws, and yet we can't run away from them, the laws. We have to fit with those laws, and if we try not to fit, then there are consequences, let's say negative consequences out of it. So what would you say, Brother Riyna? Are we just meant to sort of, how can I say, wander about, almost in just try something and then see if it works, and maybe get hit, and then then realize that's not the way it's supposed to be, and then so it's like almost trial and error? Or is there really some way where we can be guided, so we don't keep hitting our head against the wall, or at least maybe what we have said so far, these things have long-term consequences. So you don't notice initially, that something is, can you know before you take some action that this could lead to something, let's say, not very effective or not productive, and quite something destructive even.
Those laws we have to take into consideration. Of course, we have to study them beforehand and really get to know them in detail. Let me think, if someone wants to build an engine, an electric engine, then he has to study electricity, electric magnetism. He has to see, what happens if a current flows and the magnetic field is created around that wire, and if the direction of the current changes. And it takes a long time of studying those natural laws of nature's laws, till one finally has all the knowledge together and finally can build a machine, an electric motor, which works. And it's this studying of those things, those laws. Man has not created it. Man has not created physics. He cannot decide on it. It's not open in democracy. You cannot vote against gravity, and you cannot vote against the electromagnetic laws. Different charges repel each other, and the same equal charges charges repel each other, and opposite charges attract each other. And this happens all according to laws which I need to have studied before I get the thing working, before I get the electric engine working. And there the person working on it, those people, those great physicians who find out those laws, of course, they study nature. Now, there's another study, another example, which I bring. Now, those people, of course, when they studied those things, they do not study in a blind way and make one experiment after the other, but they work with an intuition of what is right. And this is, of course, weighing something with their hearts, with their spirit. They know beforehand the answer must lie in that way. And it's like a mother who sees, let us say she has children, and she sees, the child has been has played too much in the house, in the rooms. The skin is pale, and it just needs to go out, and it sends the child out of the house and say, play outside with your playmates and don't come back till 6 o'clock in the evening. So the child has to stay outside the whole afternoon. She knows that movement is an excellent thing, movement at fresh air, that it's healthy for the child. And of course, she perhaps even cannot tell where she knows it from. She just knows it from intuition. And that's a quality which great people who make great discoveries, they have it. I don't want to call it a sixth sense, because it's something much more natural than that. The discovery is really what it is. It's an uncovering of something which is there beforehand, and those laws, they exist there beforehand, and the knowledge about them exists beforehand. And when the time is ripe, of course only when the time is ripe, you can suddenly discover those laws. You can uncover the covering goes away, and that is done to a large extent with your intuition, but also with a lot of sitting through nights or working hard and doing the experiments, and then comes a new insight, and then comes a new insight, and you can come closer and closer to the solution. Now, we spend, of course, billions of pounds on research which does not lead anywhere, and it's a very uneconomic way to discover things, to go on in a blind fashion, make experiment after experiment, and a lot of research nowadays is going on that way. There's no intuition what could be right or could be not, and the reader often says, well, I knew that in advance, why do I need 200 studies to prove that thing, that movement in fresh air is good? The mother knew it before and she did it, but research recently has shown in the last decade that movement is one of the most healing and most important things to stay healthy. And I've taken some today. I wanted to quote some research, but I'm not in Germany, so I'm here, so I had to use some things here. What do we know about movement and physical exercise? What does it do? We know that it relieves stress, that it's de-stressing, that people who do move, who run around in the open and jog a little bit, or even just walk an hour, they have much less stress systems than the people just sitting all the time in the office and working on it. We know that movement, physical exercise, improves heart and cardiovascular function. You can breathe better, your heart is stronger, you can walk up a mountain. That's quite self-evident, because you move, or the heart is good, and you are much less subject to diseases of the heart and to cardiovascular dysfunction. You lose weight, of course, everyone knows that. It strengthens the bones, movement, especially in fresh air, but also otherwise physical exercise. It reduces loss of bone density in old age. It lowers the blood sugar and helps insulin to work better. It is a wonderful antidepressant. It counteracts depression. We know that people who do jogging have a much reduced rate of depression than the non-exercising or non-taking walks part of the population. It improves mood. You feel more buoyant, you feel more radiant by having every day some exercise outside. It releases happiness proteins in your brain and it improves the memory ability. All those things have been scientifically proven in the last year. So it helps memory things, you can memorize things. It improves your sleep. Sleep disturbances or insomnia occurs to a much lesser degree among people who regularly move outside. It reduces the risk of some cancers, including colon, breast, and uterine and lung cancer. So we know that has all been found by research analysis, and doctors start prescribing movement and start prescribing exercise. And we know that watching just sport on television doesn't make you exercise. But this knowledge, which is really basic and which many people think, well, I knew that all the time, that has only become into the medical world in recent years, in recent decade or so. So it has been hidden from humanity as an explicit knowledge, and we still not know why is movement so very good. There were some two very recent studies, and that's why I quoted that. I found that in Psychology Today. So movement strengthens the immune systems, and they found, for example, that the T cells in the blood, the T cells are those white blood cells which make the antibodies and which kill the intruding bacteria and kill the intruding viruses which intrude into your body. And we need those things, and they found that even those T cells, normally if you do not exercise, they decrease with old age, and that is because of one of the glands which produces them produces less and less in old age. But they found now that in a study of cyclists cycling outside, that at a very well advanced age were producing the same level of T cells as 20-year-old people. So, and they compared it also with inactive older adults, and they saw that you could increase your level of T cells, which is the main one of the basic parts of your immune system, to a level where you resemble a 20-year-old by physical exercise. So you do something incredibly good with your immune system. Well, that has been found by research, and they just start looking at everything. There's another thing where movement is very good, and it's also very recent. That's why I'm stating that. There's white matter in the brain that is a matter which insulates the neurons. The neurons are those cells which make where the electrical impulses run forth and in all directions, and where they interconnect. But those neurons, which do really the brain work, they are embedded into white matter cells, and they insulate the nerve cells so that there's no crosstalk between neurons. And they do another good thing, and they found that levels of physical activity stopped, and these were people with 65 people that study, stopped practically the deterioration of that white matter in brains, which also is part of the risk factors in Alzheimer's disease. And so there's lots of research. Now, we have found that, I don't know, just more or less in a chance process. And but the scientific community has now concentrated on that because they found something. Now, in the Grail Message, if we have something like the Grail Message, that could guide us, our research, in a direction which is fruitful. And there is they say movement itself is one of the basic laws of creation which we must obey to successfully keep diseases away. So if you want to have, our aim is to have to live good in old age, we should take our daily walks in the fresh air. And we should adhere to the law of movement, that body needs is physical movements. And there's the immune system involved, scientifically proven. There is the white matter in the brain involved, and millions of other things, all that list which I read out before. I took that straight from Psychology Today, if you're interested. And so, but knowing that it's one of the basic laws in creation, and having been told that of course would save, in my opinion, billions of research money wasted going in ways where it is not fruitful. And now and it's one of the 4 natural laws which have to be really being obeyed and adhered to. And if you want to stay healthy, you have to move, not only on the physical level. I talk now about the physical level mainly, but we know also that dancing, for example, which proceeds on the which is more artistic, where you have to look how you move and try to get a beauty in the movement, and try, for example, to synchronize with your partner. And there's all, on an emotional level, you have to synchronize with your partner. There's a to and fro between your partner and you dancing. So, and that this is the most wonderful and most effective way to fight dementia. So if we say a successful life, to find what is workable in life, to have a successful life till old age, we have to take into consideration that law of movement. And this is described in the Grail Message. And of course he goes into completely different examples, exemplifying that, but I use now those ones here, which about the health issues and how it's beneficial to your health. So if you want to successfully live, which is on the physical level, which is a life without contracting illnesses, without having dementia, without depressions, and without dementia, then adhere to that law, obey to that law, and knowing that those laws exist, and the basic laws, they are just 4 laws, you can find them in the Grail Message. And it also, as a reader, it helps you to find out, oh, this is a nonsense research and it won't lead anywhere, or that's some good research and let me read those results. And after all, you can explain why, because you know the scientists just at the moment, they know movement is just a good thing, and movement and fresh air, or say dancing, is very beneficial, very healthy to fight all the illnesses of old age. But the wonderful thing is, you know, this is because you are obeying a law of creation, and the law of movement is a law of creation. And you find it in a million ways. Just recently, not too long ago, my plumber told me we had one, what do you call those things you turn?
Okay.
No.
The tap.
A tap.
Tap.
Yeah, there's one tap where you could switch off the water for the whole house. And he told me, well, just go once a year, go down and turn it down and turn it up very quickly so that it's moving, and that keeps the tap from rusting or becoming ineffective, the whole workings of that tap, that it closes the water. So he was saying, really move it a little bit and it makes it last much longer. If you don't move it, it settles in, and after some time you cannot move it at all anymore, and what do you call those things inside it? It doesn't shut off the water completely. That's also the law of movement, and you can see it in every sphere. And what the Grail Message does, it gives you those laws, and it can put you on a much safer ground. The research is not blind going anywhere. At the moment it's like a blindfolded person grasping here and grasping there and being very happy if he finds some principle or something like movement is a healthy thing. It would be much better if we would be guided by those general principles. There would be more than enough work to do to go into the details of that, and more than enough research to do, and the benefits for humanity would be much greater at a much reduced cost. So and also, if a physician, you know then why it is, because movement is being built into creation. We have to adhere it. If we want to stay healthy, we have to move. And you can find it in anything. If you put in a bird in a very small cage, it will either die, it will get weaker and weaker, or it probably won't be able to fly anymore. Depriving something of movement has terrible consequences.
Thank you, Brother Riyna, for that. I've got sort of a different angle to what you're saying there, where because what you've been talking about is really, how can I say, like you say, you're studying the laws, you're studying life, you're studying nature, and working things from that. But we know that many people have certain beliefs, and it's like they have a doctrine of how they think that life actually works. So yes, they are aware there are laws, but the way you have presented the laws is like a discovery of those laws. For them, is they've been told do this, don't do that, so they don't necessarily understand why where this life is the way it is. It's just that's how it is, and you can do this. So, for example, we'd already talked about being truthful, and every teaching always says tell the truth and do good, like that. And then, because obviously doing good, you're helping other people, and so on. Now, also in these same teachings, they say, let's say, I want to do something, because how you've explained what you've been saying so far is like man can choose to go direction A, can go to direction B, and he can explore it, and then he'll work out how the laws are working. But some of these teachings, people think that, oh no, this is my fate has already been predetermined. So God is the will of God that, well, I'm going to use this example, but it's maybe not be the best example, that I can't have children, let's say, right? And it's not, and it's just, I just have to accept it like this. So what I want to ask you really from this point is, when people are sort of in that way, thinking that way, that because they say their teaching has come from God, and then God has told them to do this, and God has told them not to do that. And so when something doesn't happen, it means it's not God's will. So, and I might be simplifying this, what I'm saying now. So what I want to ask you, Brother Riyna, when people have such a belief that this is, very simplistic, you could say, their own, what would you say is like, how can they actually find out for themselves that this is what we are saying, that the laws are there and this is how the laws work? How can they actually discover that actually life is not like predetermined, let me say that way? How can they come out of their doctrine? And because I will say these people are honest people, and they have taken on a belief, or they've been brought up in a particular belief, and they believe, and they could say this is from nature as well, that belief is in accordance with nature, let's say. But you could see from how you've been talking, they don't really have a full picture of that, how that nature works. It's just simply rules, yes and no, yes and no. How can those people, let's say, discover that actually there's more than this, that yes and no rule?
Okay. I mean, some religions have do's and don't do's, and we do not need do's and don't do, or
Don'ts.
yeah. Command what is right, forbid what is wrong, because there is no list of such things. The only thing which is important is, does it work or doesn't it work? And if you obey those rules, you do not understand them. We have to understand. In why we do something. Otherwise, we are not really human beings. If you just obey rules, you do not live. You do not experience. You live a non-workable life, you live an unsuccessful life. And so I think such a person who just submits to do's and don'ts, and even worse, a person who thinks he can look at others and say do this and don't do this, which are a kind of police, and think they have the right to interfere in the life of others. That second class of person is definitely criminal. It's violating. A person has no right to tell another human being, oh, written somewhere is do this and don't do that. Because this other person has the right to decide on its own what it wants to do. And furthermore, if a person doesn't want to do any more the do's and don'ts of that religion, because he says they are completely arbitrary, I do not understand them, he has the right to leave that behind and say, I'm not obeying just do's and don'ts which are not understandable. And if someone applies those things and sees at the results of those do's and don'ts and sees they do not work, then he has the duty to leave those things behind, because we have to find that what works, and that only what works is in line with God's will. If your religion says don't do this and do that, and it creates a state of misery for the population, and they only hope, oh, it will become better somewhere in the future when I'm when the last judgment is and God will let me in because I did all the do's and don't do's according to that thing. Well, that's an illusion. God is requiring, did you submit to my will, which really dictated what works and do not work? And if you accepted a state of misery and did not realize that you, by the state of miseries, you obeyed human sayings, human sayings, I mean religious
Dogma?
Oh, yeah, religious dogmatic rules, and you created that havoc and that state of misery, then surely you wasted your life, and surely you have not recognized anything, because we must recognize what is God's true will. And God's true will we see in those things when things work, and things work out well. If you have a society which ends up in a disaster, if you take those rules, then you know those do's and don'ts are wrong. Or if you try out, let us say, the socialist society, which is again celebrated after it has created so much misery for humanity like no other system, still people jump around that that construct of Karl Marx and try that planned economy. Well, it did not work. It's not workable. Workability is practically almost zilch. It's systemically wrong. And to treat, and we know the consequences of that, there is no human being. A human being can be used for whatever thing, for whatever the society wishes him to do. But a human being which is forced to do something which the society needs to be done, it's an illusion that he's being fulfilled because he does something for the society. He feels very unhappy because he has other talents than those organizers who think, oh, we need 10,000 steel workers. And if you are a musician, or if you are a computer technician, or if you are if you want to do something else, your life will be ruined if you are forced to work as a steel worker. And that is because communism never accepted that there are different personalities, because personalities simply did not exist. It's in that society, it's a consequence of of economic relations, and it did not accept a difference between man and woman, and it tried to push, like in the DDR, it tried to push women into male professions, and they took the children away from the women and from the families, and the consequences were those children were retarded in relation to normal children. But for a long time they took away the children over 1 year, over 2 years, from a very early age on, because they were saying the woman is liberated when she is in the when she's part of the production process of the man. Devastating consequences for the society as a whole, and devastating consequences, for example, the children born under such a rule, because both parents had to work and they had to grow up without that security of a family, without a mama and a papa, and the child needs to explore the world. It needs that mama. It's its first word. They speak in all languages, and socialism disregarded that simple law, and it did not work. Socialism does not work. And if we look at some states which are ruled by a religious, I call it ideology because it's not from God. We know in what state they are in, and we simply can say it does not work. And you can see it if something works. Has it good results? Is it beneficial to everyone involved? Does it liberate one? Does it produce goods which are good? And does it produce happiness in the people? Or does it produce unhappiness? And the pursuit of happiness is something very important. And we have the right, we have the duty to try to live happy here on life now. And we must simply have the courage to say an organization of a state which does not produce happiness, we have to reject it. And there's no doubt that socialism and Islamic states were one of the worst examples of non-functioning states we have ever experienced in human history.
Thank you, Brother Riyna. What I wanted to say, following on from what you've said now, you've said that people have free will and they must be free to practice that free will and not have to conform to ideology or whatever system in that world that they live in. Now, and I've been watching some TV programs and so on, and seeing those countries like you're talking, similar to what ideology you've been talking about, practicing those countries, and there are people who are rebelling. Let's give an example. It doesn't mean this is necessarily correct, but let's say in one country they're forced to wear the hijab or headscarf, let me just say like that, and not all the women want to wear it, not because they're not of that religion, but they just don't want to wear it. They want to have a choice to have that. And I could even say that in other similar countries there's no, they're the same religion, but they don't enforce it. They just allow the women to do what they want. So going to such country where they are even they have you could call it a police, religious police, specifically for this sort of enforcing these things. So as I said, some of the women are rebelling, and they want their freedom. And sometimes you see those sort of women even go to the other extreme, because you've said the idea a woman should be doing womanly activities, and a man should be doing manly activities, right? And there is an overlap. You've also mentioned that too. But then sometimes we notice these some of the women who are rebelling, being forced to conform, sort of going the other extreme, that where they how can I say, they don't look like men in a way. Some of the women, not everybody, I will say like that, and they look a bit rebellious. Basically, that's what they become. And so my question about that is, should that be also be allowed? That because in a way, who should be running the system in a way? Because we know that the risk system in these countries they're not allowing freedom, and then but they themselves, that system is not right, and then so when the people rebel, there's only a minority of them that are rebelling, but they're sort of going the other extreme. Let me say, that's the point I wanted to make. So should we allow that as well? I mean when I say allow it, it's not working that way either, isn't it? Because people are sort of, you could say, maybe I would say they're overreacting, and so how can should that freedom be there as well? Let me say, for them just to be whatever you want to be, to practice what you want to be, because in a way, as I said, they may not be aligning with the natural laws as well. That's the point I'm trying to make. They want to be what they want to be, and should that also be okay for them to do that?
Okay, I must say, Brother Sard has confused me thoroughly.
I'm sorry.
Okay, by that question.
Okay, I mean, maybe I'll give an example.
Yeah, take a very simple example.
Okay, let me say actually what I watched, and I will show you, and then maybe you can point.
And where you watched it, in which country, and.
Okay, so this was Iranian women who are forced to wear their hijab, the headscarf, let's say.
So that was
they're
a television program.
In Iran. They're in Iran. So the Iranian women, this is like a law there that women are meant to wear this.
Have you been in Iran or what?
No, it was a TV documentary, and so apparently from this documentary they were showing videos of what is going on there, and there's a religious police, you could say, where if you don't do that, they sort of arrest you and all that. I mean, and then some women have rebelled.
To talk about this religious police, all those states of hell, they have this kind of moral police or religious police. In communist states it was the secret service. In Islamic states it was the kind of morality police. Also Hitler had such a thing. And there were most of the times in awful countries like Somalia, it's kind of youths driving around, or in Afghanistan, and normally they had white pickup trucks, white Toyota pickup trucks, and they were standing there, and if you saw a woman and just a little bit of hair looked too far out of the thing, she was taken away, put in some awful prison where she was raped, normally for days, and often killed. That was at the Iranian Revolution at the start. And there are many books which describe that in detail, because people got out of there. It was a regime of terror and of complete censorship, and wonderful books which describe that thing and which really are shocking enough. And there's no excuse for such a regime and for such an ideology with which such things can be rectified. A woman, if she wants, of course, she can show that her hair if she wants to. And the problem is now to be very clear about what can we do. Are we allowed to say something, or should we say something? In my opinion, not. It is really not us to interfere there. It is the people there must really learn to put up that much resistance that they can overthrow it. And we must also remember how those Islamic states, or that Iran, got into existence. There was in the 70s, I think it was, huge demonstrations against the Shah. The Shah might not be a good person altogether, but he definitely was not that person as he was portrayed. He had the most liberal society in the Islamic world what concerned women. Women could do practically all at the time of the Shah. It was the student revolution which brought back Khomeini. And it was the leftist student, the politically correct persons at the time. They toppled the Shah at the time. So it was just those people who are those progressive left at the time. It was this close association which you see still today between the militant left and the left movement and the political correct movement with Islam, two terrible things against two non-workable things. They sense they sense their kinship. They sense they are equal. That is the law of homogeneity, as Abdushin describes it. They sense their homogeneity. That's why they work together. That's why women's slip has such a favor for Islamic women and Islamic way of behavior. It's completely crazy. Big parts of they sympathize with each other, and both will bring. The Islamic states have brought terrible suffering about the people, and if we would let the leftish movements, if they would get the upper hand here, I think also that will be terrible consequences in terms of liberty, and it's looking quite dangerous nowadays. And so definitely it is their thing. They embrace that ideology, and of course some people suffer at the edges. They come to the recognition, no, that's not right, I want to get out of it. But that recognition they only could get because they were living under such a regime of a moral police, enforcing those rules of Islam, those do's and don't do's, and they know that those prisons are there, and that you cannot be free, that you cannot enjoy music, and you couldn't do the same thing under Hitler, that you cannot express your feelings when you have a good music, you cannot clap, you cannot jump around. It's forbidden because expressive show of emotion is forbidden in Islam. It's a don't do it. And you have in the audience you have those supervisors of morality by the state, by an oppressive state. So and you can read those books. I mean, one of them, a sympathizer who brought about was this I don't know that woman. Okay, so I just cut short. That book, Reading Lolita in Tehran, was written by one of the students of the student revolt who toppled the Shah and brought about that Islamic State. And there you can read how those times were and how the implementation of an Islamic State proved oppressive in all respects and curtailing the freedom of the people, and those dire consequences should really tell a reasonably thinking human being that the rules of Islam, if they are implemented, are not workable. The result is not a state where you are free, where you are happy, where you can pursue happiness, which should be the aim of every state. So with those words I think we conclude the evening, and
thank you, Brother Riyna.
Say goodbye.
Yes.
Till next week, and I hope I get more people from the audience.
Yes.
From
yes.
the listeners.
Maybe we have to publicize a bit more for the listeners to join in this for us, to have a discussion with us. So thank you, listeners, for joining us tonight. Hope you enjoyed the show. Yes, we'll be back next week as usual, Tuesday evening, 6 p.m. We haven't worked out the topic. We're talking about working out things, but we haven't worked out the topic for next Tuesday. But we will have by that time, obviously. So please do join us again. And I wish you a great week, and God bless. And Brother Sayom's next. How are you doing, Brother Sayom?
Oh, I'm well, Brother Sard.
Good to see you.
Yes, thank you. You yourself. How you doing, Riyna? How you doing?
Good.
Fine, thank you.
Yes, yes. Looking forward to his show next. Dear listeners, please stay on the radio and have a great week. God bless.